Okay, looks like we are live. I want to welcome everyone who joins us today, whether it's live or watching us later on. I want to welcome Marilyn Strickland with us today. She is running for the U.S. Congress position that is currently held by Denny Heck. And I was just noticing that I see his picture right behind me. He is a has been a great supporter of the Fife Milton Edgewood Chamber and our area. But thank you for being with us today. We're excited to have you and to learn a little bit more about you. I know that Tacoma is very familiar with you, and you also ran the Seattle Chamber for a couple of years, and I can't wait to hear about some of that. But just start out by telling us a little bit about yourself and what's important to you at this time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, Laura. My name is Marilyn Strickland, and I'm a candidate for Congress in the 10th District of Washington State, and I hope to fill the very big shoes of Denny Heck. And, as a former chamber executive and a former mayor, I really do believe that my depth and breadth of knowledge give me a strong advantage when it comes to being able to serve the residents of the 10th District. And I say that because the 10th District itself is diverse in every possible sense of the word. Because our population because our population is not so dense down here like it is up in King County, it covers a broad geography. And of course, the Fife Milton Edgewood area includes that, but it's also Mason County, Thurston County, Pierce County, and a very large geography. And what that says to me is that it is literally diverse in every possible sense of the word. It's urban, it's rural, it's suburban. The economic ecosystem includes everything from Joint Base Lewis McChord to our industrial businesses at the port to a lot of small businesses that really, line up in Fife, a lot of retailers and restaurants, et cetera. And so as I think about, why I'm running for office, when I decided to run for office, who knew that we'd be in the middle of a pandemic and an economic crisis and racial injustice being amplified? So here we are. So as I think about, the why, it's really about getting control of this virus on a national level. It's working on an economic recovery that's going to not leave any people behind and no businesses behind, because we know that different businesses have different needs. And then really looking at, how we come back stronger and better than before COVID. And I think that's possible if we're willing to work together. And that's what I love about Pierce County and Thurston County in the South Sound. And there is a spirit of working together.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned the diversity, and I was just thinking that this district really is so diverse. I actually live in Sumner, work here in Fife and cover the Fife Milton Edgewood area. But how do you reconcile that rural versus urban, and how do you help the constituents in all of those areas?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it is a matter of understanding what their needs are, and then really thinking about how federal policy can support local policy. Because I think sometimes, the federal government obviously has a very, very large footprint, but at the same time, the federal government often exists to support what's happening locally. And so, for example, we know that there is a big agriculture industry here in the Fife, Milton, and Puyallup and Sumner area. And so, are we supporting our local farmers? Are we doing things to help mitigate some of the challenges from climate change? Are we making sure that they have resilience? And then, do they need any sort of funding, because COVID has affected all of us? And so being very mindful of the different economic ecosystems, whether it's agriculture or retail or manufacturing. I'd say the other thing too is really, and this is really important, I think we sometimes forget about this, Laura, is that you have to have really good staff and really good staff here at home in the 10th District and really good staff in Washington, D.C., because, I'll be traveling back and forth, but I'm really going to rely on the people here at home to have really high quality constituent response services and really keeping abreast of what's happening so that I can be a better member of Congress. So it's my responsibility, but who I hire and the quality of my staff here at home is going to have a huge impact on how successful I can be to serve the people.
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I can't tell you how valuable Lauren Adler was with Denny Heck's office, and the staff there, they've all been really great, and I know that I can count on them, and I know that they'll answer my calls or my emails. So it's a big deal to have good, reliable staff. So I completely agree with that. Okay, so let's talk about the Fife area, Port of Tacoma, and some of the issues that we have here. Transportation is always number one on our list, but there's other issues here too. The growth that's happening. So, what are some of the issues that you see for this area that you can make a difference on in Washington?
Yeah, so we know that the transportation challenges in the Fife-Sumner area are, on the one hand, it's a result of a booming port, which is good for the economy. On the other hand, it's a result of the booming port because there are these large trucks and we're moving people. And think about this, we have cars, we have trucks, we have buses, we will soon have light rail. And think about how those things are going to work together. And so for me, it's really looking at the entire transportation system and asking ourselves how we can ensure that people and goods are moving, because that's so essential to our economy, but also how it affects the quality of life. And I tell people that the best transportation system for consumers or workers or families is one that you don't have to use so often. And I mean the amount of time you have to spend in it, right? And so as I think about the economy of the future, especially given what's happened with COVID, I would like to see us locate some of our high wage jobs more in the Pierce County area so that people do not have to get on the highway and go to Seattle or go to Bellevue. I would like to see us think about having telecommuting as a possible option without hurting the commercial real estate market, because we know that people showing up for work is a part of our economy as well. And then also too, as we look at some of these big projects coming down the road, the expansion of Sound Transit coming into Fife, as we think about some of the highway completion projects that we have, how do we think about it so that we can be inclusive and not overinvest in one area but inadvertently hurt another? But a large booming port is a great job creator, but at the same time we know it creates a lot of traffic. And so how can we just work together in an ecosystem and make it as convenient for people as possible? And I say the best transportation system is one that gets you to and from home and work and what you need in as little time as possible.
Definitely agree with that. Okay, let's turn to economic development and business recovery. COVID has hit all of our businesses really hard, and it's a struggle for some of them to come back. Some of them may not ever come back. What are some things that Congress can do? I'm hoping that today, hopefully, there will be some action in DC on this subject, but you could see more of that in next year. So how do you feel about that?
So, the House did pass a recovery package back in May, and it's just been stalled. And as we look at what's happening right now, especially as the weather is changing, the sad truth is that there will be businesses that close between now and the end of the year because they've been barely hanging on. And I think the couple of things that this has amplified is that even before COVID, a lot of our businesses were just breaking even. Mm-hmm. And now that COVID has hit, their situation is just more dire. And so I am hopeful that we will pass a recovery package before 2020, and we will learn from the first round of funds to be very targeted and specific about making sure that the funds go to the businesses who really need them, because people did get overlooked in the first round. And then I suspect too, there'll be another round come 2021, because this recovery is not happening as quickly as we want. And I say this because so much of our economy depends on people feeling completely safe showing up. And until we get a complete handle on COVID, which we've done a good job with in Washington State, by the way, but we rely so much on tourism as part of our economy. And that means people getting on planes, coming down here to the South Sound, enjoying all the great things we have to offer. And that affects restaurants, people going to events, people going to sporting events, going to concerts, all those things. And so we have to make sure that we have a full recovery, but also too that any funding that we come up with in this round, hopefully in 2020, and even a subsequent round in 2021, is going directly to the businesses who need them. And then also too an awakening that says small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. And even when we aren't in a pandemic, we must pay special attention to them and make sure they're successful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's turn now to racial equity. This is something that has been amplified over the summer, as you
Yeah.
said. And you know what are some of your what are some things that you can do in Congress to help unify people?
Yeah, I mean, you cannot legislate what's in someone's heart and mind, but what we can do is have a willingness to have these very hard conversations. And they're not hard for all people, but this is a new conversation for some folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we look at racial equity, we know that the inequities that have existed, again, before COVID are just amplified because of COVID. And that's everything from education. As an example, we know that there are some families who simply do not have access to high-speed broadband, so they can't even participate in online learning. Or you hear stories about young people going to, their favorite fast food place because that's where they get access to Wi-Fi that is consistent. So education. The other issue is around, economic opportunity. What are we doing to provide education, job training, and job opportunities for more people? The other equity issue is around healthcare, not just having access to it, but even some of the experiences that people have within the healthcare system, disparities in how people are given medication, disparities in how they're treated. And so making sure that our healthcare system is equitable. But, I wrote an article about 2 years ago for this newspaper called the Seattle Medium, and it was on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And it talked about economic justice. And as we talk about racial equity, we need to talk about economic justice as a big part of it. And then, of course, finally, the issue around, the criminal justice system and policing. I support getting rid of cash bail. I support legalizing marijuana because of the disproportionate effect it has on some communities, and communities of color especially. The other thing I think it's important too is, looking at law enforcement in the context of a very local decision between police departments and their local communities and local government, and making sure that the federal government can support the work that they do to be more accountable, to be more transparent, and also meeting the needs of the communities. And I say that because there was an act that was passed called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, named after the victim of that tragedy that happened in Minneapolis. But it has 4 tenets that are pretty straightforward. It requires implicit bias training. It requires body cameras. It talks about this principle of qualified immunity and gets rid of it. And then finally, it bans chokeholds. And those are not controversial things, but they're ways that the federal government can support the work that local government wants to do. Because at the end of the day, every person, regardless of their background, wants to be in a community that is safe for all people. And every interaction that we have with agencies should be safe as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, let's turn to housing.
Okay.
There's a housing shortage, obviously, and what are some things that how in Congress can you make a difference on the housing front here in our district?
Absolutely. So we know that there was a study that came out by a group called Up for Growth that I've been a part of, a local advisory committee, and we're about 250,000 units short of housing in the central Puget Sound region. So clearly there's a supply issue. We also know that, when the supply is low, the prices go up. And so we just simply need to build more housing. And I would say we need more low-income housing, we need more affordable housing, and we need workforce housing. And that means that we have to look at local land use regulations because those are often the biggest barrier to adding more housing. We also have to look at trade policy that makes getting the materials to build more expensive. And the other thing we have to do is really make sure that the federal government can play a bigger role. And that means everything from how the Housing and Urban Development Department, HUD, looks at housing vouchers. It means maybe investing a lot more in the low-income housing tax credit, and even doing something like making a massive investment in housing and treating affordable housing like basic infrastructure. When we talk about infrastructure, it is typically in the context of roads, bridges, utilities, and mass transit. But if you think about it, affordable housing can be considered basic infrastructure because it has to be built, it creates jobs, and it helps shelter people, and it keeps them safe. And so I would like to see us treat affordable housing like basic infrastructure and think about how the federal government can make a much larger investment to supplement the private sector and the public sector here at home.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to move quickly to the next subject.
Okay.
Not that I mean I think we could go on for a while about housing, but
we could.
yeah, about all of these, but I want to try to keep them succinct a little bit. Let's talk about mental health. Uh,
Okay.
that's an issue that is seems to be growing. Uh,
Mhm.
it's something that we see on the streets a lot around
Yeah.
here, and with COVID, I think that it's an issue now for a lot of people that may not have been
Yeah.
6 months ago. So what are some things in the mental health area that can be done?
Well, it's interesting because, you've talked about the effect of COVID on people's emotional health and well-being, and it has had an effect on us. By nature, we are social creatures. And so being physically isolated and having all of our meetings in this format is a big change for a lot of us. And so I would say, if you look at the role of the federal government, 20 some odd years ago, the federal government divested in mental health. And they said that they were going to create community mental health systems around the entire country. What they did not do was sufficiently fund those mental health facilities. And so you have state and local government trying to backfill those resources, and they just don't have enough of them. And so I would like to see the federal government invest more in behavioral health and mental health, including substance abuse, but also to looking at the healthcare system and treating mental health as part of essential basic healthcare. And I think if we're able to do it that way, we take away the stigma and we really understand that there is a direct relationship between your emotional and mental health and your physical health. They are completely connected and related. So I'd like to see us invest more. I'd also like to see us understand and recognize the link between mental health and homelessness and mental health and criminal justice. And I'll give you two examples. Sadly, in some of these instances where we see police involved shootings that result in death, it is often someone who had untreated mental health issues. They engage in antisocial behavior. They were out in the community doing something. Someone called 911 because they were afraid. And then there was a confrontation with the law enforcement officer. And this is not excusing behavior that is bad and saying there's no accountability. But imagine how different that would be if we adequately funded and treated mental health so that person would not be in a position to have someone call 911 on them. The other part of mental health too is that, people who are homeless get there for many reasons. Loss of a job, domestic violence, sometimes it's substance abuse, and sometimes it's mental health issues or complete lack of affordable housing. But as we look at the housing crisis and homeless crisis, we have to understand that people who are chronically homeless did not get there overnight, and they often have mental health issues, or if they were homeless, being unhoused and having to live the violent insecurity of being homeless brought on mental health issues. And so making sure that we connect the two when we talk about people who are homeless, who need help, but also understanding that the federal government grossly divested in it and can do more to invest. That was a long-winded answer about a
No, that was good. That was good. Thank you. Okay, workforce development. This is an area that our chamber has tried to focus on. Because we're here at the Port of Tacoma. There's so many jobs here. We've developed a program along with the 5 school district, and are working with kids and getting them to see and know and understand some of the jobs that are available that they may not have known ever even existed.
Right.
So this is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts here, and also Congressman Heck was very supportive of workforce development and the FBLA program here in Fife. Given workforce development, what are some of your top priorities?
Yeah, so I'm very happy to see that you are working with the high schools, because that's really where you plant the seed for someone to consider a career. And it's interesting, we have this giant port, and to your point, a lot of young people don't even think of maritime as a career, and they don't realize that a port is a large, sophisticated international business. And it's everything from being a longshore person to working in administration. There are just so many jobs there. And so exposing young people at an early age is important. And I know that the federal government, clearly provides workforce WIOA funding Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act funding to local workforce development councils. And so how can the federal government make sure that that funding is adequate, and to really make sure that we are focusing on some of these high demand professions where we know that there is a retirement boom coming. And that is everything from work in maritime to education to healthcare, especially nursing. And so let's look at opportunities where we know that there are openings, and how do we help young people see opportunities there. The other part about workforce development too, though, is recognizing that we shouldn't just focus on young people. There are mid-career people who've been in the workforce, and maybe through technology, their jobs are changing, or they need to make a lateral move, and ensuring that we're working with employers to ensure that they are providing adequate training for people if jobs are going away. And the reality is that technology is going to change the workplace. The economy that we know now will be different in 2021 and 5 years from now. So what are we doing in advance to prepare people so that we do not leave people out in the cold? And the thing about technology is that women are often disproportionately affected by changes in technology. And so as we look at workforce development, I want to see us lean in on making sure that professions where you see a high number of women get special attention with workforce development. But it's something that's really important because we know that we have a talent pool that is deep and wide, but sometimes we need to direct people to places where they can actually make a decent living, be debt-free, have a secure retirement, good benefits, and really live comfortably. And there's a big opportunity here to do that. And so I look forward, as your next Congress member, all things considered, hoping it goes well, working closely with you so that I can be an asset and bring resources to help your economy thrive.
That's great. Thank you for that. We really appreciate that. I think that we are going through a tectonic shift right now in the workforce, and we need to stay on top of it. So thank you. Okay, my final topic here that I have is climate change.
Okay.
There's a lot of conversations going on about this right now. Being here again at the port, and industry, regulations. What sort of changes can be made in Congress to address the climate change issue?
Yeah, so climate change is a global phenomenon. And one of the things that I was really proud of is that, when this administration pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, I stood with 140 other mayors around the country and said we were still dedicated to it. And what does that mean? It means acknowledging that transportation is the #1 cause of climate emissions. So what are we doing to have a lower carbon fuel standard, to make it easier to own a car that is electric, to investing more in mass transit and buses? I mean, Pike's is going to benefit from that when Sound Transit makes its way down here. And so really recognizing that transportation is the #1 cause of carbon emissions. And also too, recognizing that there are things that we need to do to help people recover from the effects. We know that there's a big agriculture community. And, do we have plans in place for resiliency? Are we helping them be successful so that people are able to get access to local food as opposed to having it come from different parts of the world? And so being very hyper local in how we consume agriculture and food is important, having a resilience plan. We know that flooding has been a big impact from climate change because we have unpredictable weather and really heavy rains, and the flooding has a huge impact. And so what are we doing to mitigate some of those issues? And then finally, something as simple as saying that we want to plant more trees. Trees are great for the environment. They provide shade from a hot sun, which helps regulate homes and buildings. They capture carbon, and they actually clean rainwater. And so looking at the many ways that we can attack climate change. And then finally, looking at the fact that, we here in Washington State have this beautiful estuary called the Puget Sound, and it's the second largest estuary in the entire state. And what are we doing to make sure that we are investing in recovery effort the way that Congressman Kilmer and Danny Heck did, and also making sure that we are being respectful of tribal sovereignty. So it's a large bucket of what we can do, but at the end of the day, climate change does affect us. It affects weather patterns, it has exacerbated the wildfires, and it has a huge economic impact and public health impact. And so it is a serious issue that requires our attention. And I look forward to working with an administration that is going to have a detailed plan to ensure that the transition to a cleaner economy is a just one. The last thing we want to do is put people out of work who've made a decent living and have good benefits, but ensure that they are able to come along and make a decent living and benefit from this massive investment in infrastructure that we need to transition to a cleaner economy.
That's great. Thank you. Well, we've covered a lot of subjects here in a very short amount of time, and I appreciate that. So I want to give you a few minutes to give any final thoughts and discuss anything that we may not have talked about that we probably should have. So now's your chance.
All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. And I know this has been a very brief session, but I will say this, as a former mayor, as someone who has been a leader in this region, and someone who's been a former chamber executive, I really understand this ecosystem of government, business, and I'm not just going to say business, I'm going to say employers, because your members are not just businesses, they're nonprofit organizations, they're different people who employ folks. And there's that ecosystem of interdependence. And when the private sector and business sector and employer sector does well, that's actually good for government. It's good for all of us. And so how can we work together? And as you look at, what we're facing right now as a nation, a pandemic, an economic crisis, and some tragic issues around racial inequity, I do believe that my experience and my perspective make me the best candidate who's going to be able to actually move things forward and do the work. It's one thing to talk about what you want to do, but there's a reality of having the relationships to move things forward. I'm proud to have the endorsements of 25 sitting members of Congress. And these are people who range in politics from very progressive to more moderate, and they come from all parts of the country. And when you get to a place like Congress for 400 some odd people, you have to have relationships, and you have to understand how you're going to negotiate and make things happen. So I look forward to the opportunity to stand up for our employer community, because when employers do well, it's good for government, because there are tax revenues that provide basic services for the people that we want to help. So thank you for the chance to be here today. I look forward to having more conversations with you later if this election goes well, but it would be my honor to represent you and the amazing people and employers in the 10th Congressional District of Washington State.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been great to chat with you and get to know you a little bit better. And I want to encourage everyone to send in your ballots. I actually have ours today that I'm in the mailbox right now, or in the drop box. So make sure you get your ballots in. And thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you will share this video with others, and I hope you have a great day, and good luck on the final stretch.
Thank you for having me here.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Mm-hmm.